Good morning. This is William McKissock with Schooley Mitchell, your expense reduction specialist, with my social media show where I'm helping businesses get in front of people on the social media networks. Today I have with me John Foster. He's the owner and CEO of PathFinder Group. They're a business that helps businesses look at their growth and their exit strategies towards being a successful business and passing on that really fantastic business. John, tell me a little bit more about yourself and also a little bit more about what PathFinder does.
Well, good morning, William, and thanks so much for having me. It's a great time to be on a webinar, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So PathFinder Group is really an organization that focuses mostly on family businesses and trying to help them drive sustainable growth and intentionally build strong cultures that reflect the founders' visions. Our goals really, and if you think about this, most family businesses, for whatever reason they're in business, are pursuing their version of the American dream. And there are lots of ways that that dream can become a nightmare. And what we want to do is our dead level best to help ensure that they realize that American dream. So that's what we do.
Okay, and I understand from your business model that you tend to focus on the growth of a business and obviously the culture of the business. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the growth and then we can possibly talk about the culture. So why have you focused on growth?
So if you take a look at what determinants factor in to the most successful companies, you'll find that year-over-year growth is probably the greatest predictor of long-term success. And in surveys, it's the #1 concern that owners talk about time and time again. If you put a room of 50-year-olds and 60-year-old business owners in a room and talk about the greatest concern they have, 9 out of 10 of them will say growth. We want the number to be bigger. They're not talking about exit per se. They're talking about growing their company. So it's a big deal, and that's why we focus on it.
Yeah, obviously you want the business to grow. If there's going to be an exit strategy, that business wants to be as big and as strong as possible. What's different from your type of consultation to other people in your specific sphere of business consulting?
I'd say maybe there's 2 or 3 differences that stand out. One, not only have I been a business owner my entire life, I was the CEO of a national company. So I come at this conversation about growing companies from both a strategic perspective and an operational perspective. I taught family business at the University of Tampa, and so I also understand much of the underlying theory and what the literature has to say about the challenges within family businesses. And then finally, I guess our approach is pretty holistic. To that end, we bring some proprietary tools to the conversation. One in particular was developed at MIT and uses artificial intelligence to really assess 18 value drivers that can determine where the bottlenecks in an organization are and can help the owners determine where they want to put scarce resources to increase the value of the enterprise. And that's huge because one of the things that owners are always concerned about is the limited resources they have and whether or not the decisions they're going to make are the best decisions. So we like to be able to help them minimize the risk in making the round choices. These 18 value drivers are really 9 external drivers that we look at, and then 9 internal drivers. And it really helps them position the company to focus on the things that matter, the things that can really impact value.
Okay, to take that a little bit further, that internal and external growth, what can companies expect as an outcome from working with you on the growth strategy in particular?
I think clarity. I mean, if you talk about what your employees want, they want to know where are we going, how are we going to get there, and how do we know that we're making the right choices, metrics, feedback, things like that. So they can expect a pretty clear view as to where the bottlenecks are. That's a point of beginning. And then we'll rank in some prioritized fashion the things that we'll recommend business owners work on so they can get a bigger bang for their buck, which is important. But I'd like them to see a return on investment sooner rather than later. And so we guide them to make those kind of choices. And at the end of the day, allocating resources is a big deal. And depending on the vagaries of the market, those resources could be scarce or scarcer. So it's a pretty important thing to be able to pinpoint.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the culture of a business as well as the growth part. And I said at the top that we're going to talk about culture. Don't most companies need some kind of cultures and values instilled within their organization to be able to engineer this growth that you can teach them how to achieve?
So the short answer is yes. Perhaps a better answer, a better question is to ask, where does the culture within a company come from? And in the beginning, when you've got a small group of people, it's certainly influenced by the founders, and that's great. But as organizations grow, it's more and more difficult from an operational standpoint for the founder to influence employees. Employees come, employees go. And over time, as the organization grows, it's far more difficult to preserve the values that the founder has brought to the business. And so what you'll find is, as I said, every company has a culture. But as they grow, that culture, unfortunately, becomes one that reflects the dominant personalities in the business. And so you get an ad hoc culture. And that might not be such a bad idea if the dominant personalities reflect the values of the founder, but all too often that's not the case. And so you'll get an organization going down a toxic path that has all kinds of ramifications that we'll talk about a little bit later.
So in relation to the culture and the values within a business, how does your work in this area differ from other companies that are helping businesses with their cultures and values and understanding it?
Well, I'd say that, first of all, we take to heart what Peter Drucker said many, many years ago, and that is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's endured because it's true. But we take a look at culture through the prism of anthropologists, actually. We take a look at culture not from the standpoint of values, and I don't want to dismiss values. I think values are important. But from the standpoint of how we differ, we take a look at the behaviors behind the values. It's absolutely critical that we understand that a culture is nothing more than the aggregate of all the behaviors that we see going on in the company. And if we're trying to get those behaviors in alignment with the overall vision of the company, then it stands to reason that we've got to define what those behaviors look like. And that's critical. So when you ask me what differentiates us in the work of our culture, I'd say we've got proprietary technology that starts with recognizing its behaviors, not values, that are most critical. We define those behaviors. And when we bring leadership into a discussion about that, we ultimately find out that they can identify between 25 and 35 behaviors that matter. Now, why is that important? Well, 25 to 35 behaviors that matter is a far cry from the 5 to 7 values that many organizations put up in the entryway to their companies. So recognizing that is important. The second thing is that behaviors are important, but if you don't wrap rituals around those behaviors so that those behaviors ultimately become habits, this project is going to wither and die like every new project that looks like a shiny object when you get started. You've really, really got to identify the rituals that will sustain the behavior, the drudgery, if you will, that supports those behaviors until they become habitual. That's critical.
And that was fairly in depth for somebody who's a layperson like me in understanding this area of business. But can you elaborate just a little bit further on that particular topic?
Sure. Just so everybody listening understands that there's science behind this. Charles Duhigg wrote a book, and you might pick it up if you're so inclined, called The Power of Habit. And in it, he explained the science behind developing habits. And at the core of this science is the development of rituals that I mentioned that support the behaviors you want to habituate. Within a different context, some of you viewing this might have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. Well, he talks about in that book how critical it is to do something for some extended period of time before you can become an expert in it. He uses the sports metaphor because it's one we can all relate to. Serena Williams spending 10,000 hours doing the fundamentals that require that kind of proficiency. You mentioned earlier that you're a soccer player. Certainly the best soccer players put in an awful lot of time to be able to handle that ball as easily as they handle it. And the same is true with the kind of behaviors that we're going for in a company. To do what has to be done day in and day out requires the same kind of rituals that athletes have in order for them to get out and do what they have to do time and time again before they become absolutely proficient. So that's a big difference between the work that we do and the work that you might otherwise find out there.
Thank you. That was a very concise answer, and thanks for digging a little bit deeper for me to help me understand. Why has interest in this topic increased over the last few years?
You know, it is. If you look at Harvard Business Review or Ernst & Young or some of the other business publications, Inc., it's one of the top 2 or 3 topics that business owners cite as knowing that it's important, intuitively knowing that it's important, but wrestling with just how it is that we tackle the subject. We're finding that in a capitalist market where market forces are really trying diligently to commoditize everything that we do, standing out in the crowd is critical, but it's difficult. And so there are essentially 6 reasons why people are pursuing culture. One is to separate themselves in a commoditized environment, and I can explain these more in detail if you've got time and have an interest.
Yes, please.
Yep. The other is to more successfully compete for hiring and retaining talent. That's critical, and I'll come back to that. You want to increase productivity. We talked about growing a company. Well, one way to grow a company is to reduce the cost associated with turnover and to build institutional knowledge through retention. And if you can do that, by definition, the cost side of the ledger will go down and the productivity side will go up. So being able to increase employee engagement is very important. And then a lot of times there is a good culture, and the founders are smart enough to know that we're growing and we don't want to lose that good culture. So how in heaven's name can we create a framework around making that institutionalized? And that drives a lot of the folks that come to us. And then preserving the legacy of a founder. If you've got the founder of a business or the next generation wanting to pass it to a successive generation, but everybody understands the importance that culture plays in that company's success, preserving it becomes a big deal. So how do you do that? Well, we help organizations answer that question. And then the 6th reason, a reason that's really emerging now, and everybody watching this will get this because It's related to the accelerated growth in work from home policies. Many of us have been doing this distance work or working out of our homes for many, many years. In fact, there's an acronym called SOHO, Small Office, Home Office. It's been around a long, long time. But employers have struggled with, do they want to embrace that model? Will my employees be as productive if they're not under my eyes, under my supervision? And COVID has really introduced the idea that the answer is yes. They are absolutely as productive, if not more productive. And I think you're going to see more and more businesses adopting a work policy that includes more time at home, less time in the office. So why do I mention that? Well, there's an increasing appetite amongst workers to feel as though they belong to the tribe. And how do you curry that sense? How do you nurture that sense if folks are not in contact with one another? And so having a culture that facilitates that togetherness, that collective sense that we are part of the same team is critical. So to that end, we've developed a proprietary app. That's a platform that allows for the communication of the behaviors and the rituals that I mentioned earlier, along with a number of other, a treasure trove really of features and benefits that make it easier for people who are dispossessed, if you will, or distributed to feel as though they're part of the mothership. So those are the big reasons. Not to feel commoditized, to provide an experience that differentiates you from your competition with your customer, to be able to attract and retain the highest and best, which at the end of the day goes to that old cliche that it's about the people, because at the end of the day, it really is about the people.
Yeah.
And then to help them become more engaged, more productive. And I think it's Simon Sinek that talks about an aspect of that that's absolutely critical. And I see it in some of the work that I've done at one of our larger clients who has actually 5 generations working there. And the younger generation really wants to feel as though they're a part of something that is purposeful. And where employers understand that and provide that in terms of a strong culture of belonging, you don't lose people when they have that. So it's very, very powerful. And then finally, to protect an existing culture, to provide for the legacy, as I mentioned earlier, of a founder and preserve that culture. And then ultimately to recognize that with this new normal, we're going to have more and more people that are distributed across the country, across the globe. And if we want to make them feel as though they're a part of the team and keep them, we're going to have to adapt new ways to develop our culture. So that's it. Growth and culture, different sides of the same coin.
Thank you, John. That has been very informative. And from an empathetic point of view, I can understand being part of a large organization like Schooley Mitchell. We have a headquarters, and then us franchise offices are scattered all over the country. And you're talking about, can you work from home? Can you work out in the outlier places? Yes, you can. And in some ways, COVID-19 has actually brought us closer together as a family of franchisees, because we're able to communicate much more readily through these means because it's become much more part of the norm. So that's a small token that I'm taking from this conversation. So anybody listening to this, obviously there's a wealth of knowledge in there, and really people should be tapping into this, because this can help grow businesses and help them understand where their journey is to make their businesses better and more profitable. So John, thank you very much for coming on my show. I really appreciate it. Without people like you coming on, I wouldn't have a show. So thank you very much for coming on. And any of the viewers looking at this, you can see John's details underneath his frame in the video. So please reach out to John to help your business grow and succeed. Thank you, John. And I'll now hand it over to Dave for the weather.
William, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care.